So about 1,500 years ago or so, there was a huge fad that swept across Christianity. That it kind of took up lots of people. It became very popular. Everybody kind of wanted to do it. They started forming little groups so they could take part in this fad that was sweeping Christianity. And that fad was monasticism. About 1,500 years ago, a bunch of people decided, you know, what would be really cool is if we lived out in the desert all by ourselves. And then so many people were living out in the desert all by themselves, so they said we should all live out here all by ourselves together and form a monastic community. Now, yeah, that's a great idea. And so that idea started sort of spreading. It started in Egypt, really, and then kind of spread across the whole of the Christian lands at that time. And it came into Europe. It took a little while, you know. They didn't have cell phones in those days, so it took time for the message to kind of get across. But the fad kind of just kept sweeping across. But it turns out when you get a bunch of people and they live together, despite their really good intentions, sometimes things just go awry. You know, personality clashes, and some people want to be really alone, and some people really wanting to be together, and you got the introverts and the extroverts, so it's just a mess. It's just a mess, this monasticism thing. Some of the communities were really causing some problems. And so there was a guy who came along and said, you know, I think this is a really good idea, this monasticism, but it needs some rules so we can make it work. And that was an Italian guy, and his name was Benedict, Saint Benedict. And he wrote a little book conveniently called Benedict's Rule. And it told monastic communities how they should live. And it basically, there's some particular rules, you know, about when they're supposed to worship, which was a lot, especially in the middle of the night. Like midnight is a good time to get up and come to chapel. So it wasn't really conducive to a lot of sleep being a monk, but it had its perks, I'm sure. But anyway, his rule basically, there are a couple of things that are really key in the rule. And one is that our lives need balance. Right? In the communities before, there were some people, all they wanted to do was spend time praying in chapel. You know, and it's really hard to eat if nobody's doing any of the work. So Benedict said, look, everybody's got to participate in the work of the community. Right? We all have to kind of take turns doing the things that we need to do to sustain ourselves. Like someone's got to grow the food, and someone's got to bake the bread, and someone's got to clean out the chamber pots. Right? All those things have to happen. And so we all got to take a turn. We all have to participate in the work of the community. Another thing that Benedict said is that our lives need balance, that we need to spend time in prayer. And we need to spend our time doing the work that needs to be done. And we need, of course, our rest. And so he said that we need a balance between those three things. And the rule of Benedict gives about 8 hours for each of them. You've been 8 hours of work a day, 8 hours of worship and prayer, and about 8 hours of sleep in broken up little segments. And the other thing that Benedict's rule said is that we have to be committed to the community. Because in the old days, the monks, you know, they'd go and they would join the people who were all living apart together, and they would like these people or not, and then they'd move on to some other community. So there's a lot of coming and going, and that caused, you know, problems as well. And so Benedict said, look, when you join a monastic community, that's where you have to stay. No more of this roaming around and going to find a place that suits you. You need to learn to blossom where you're planted. That's not the actual words in Benedict's rule, but I mean, that's what he's getting at, right? That we have to learn how to be the people we're called to be in the place that we find ourselves. And so they had this idea that they were really focused on community. So this shared labor, this balance of life, and this commitment to community are sort of the bedrock foundation of monasticism that grew and blossomed in Europe in the Middle Ages. And one of the places where this rule was really, really, really influential was in England, right? Which is sort of the origins of our church. And so as our faith tradition, which has its roots in the English religious tradition, sort of changed in the time of the Protestant Reformation, this foundation that Benedict, through his rule, has sort of established in Christianity, carried over into our Anglican tradition. And so Anglicans have always been a people who have been really committed to community. Right? That faith is not something that is deeply private, though it is. It is not just that. It is also something that has to take place within community. That Christianity is not something you can do all by yourself. You can really only do it with other people. That's like a bedrock principle of our tradition. So the community is sort of centered. And that our lives need to be balanced, that we can't be just committed so much that we forget the things that aren't important. Right? We need to make time for the work that needs to be done. We need to make time for God in our lives. And we need to take time to rest, Sabbath, that kind of thing. And we need to be committed to the work that we're called to do. Because all of us have something to contribute to the life of the community. Whether that's big or whether it's small, everybody has something to offer. Even if it's just a kind word to another. Not everybody has to be the baker. Like somebody has to pull the carrots out of the ground too. Like there's always things to be done, and no contribution is better than another, or greater than another, or more important than another. Everything is necessary and valuable in the life of the community. And so this Anglican tradition, the way it's kind of grown and morphed, and as it moved itself across the Atlantic Ocean and sort of took root here, is one of the ways it's worked itself out is that we are people who, as a church, traditionally have been very committed, especially to community and working together to make our communities better. There are lots of groups who, if you get into it, as civic organizations whose founders are Episcopalians, right? And we love to, I don't know how pertinent it is now, but we love to talk about a lot of the people who signed the Declaration of Independence were Episcopalians. And there have been more Episcopalian presidents than presidents of any other denomination. So I don't think that makes us better, but it does suggest there's something in our tradition that propels people into public service, however broadly we might want to define that. And I think that's kind of the thing that these readings are getting at today, is that our focus on the betterment of the wider community is really in line with what the law and what the gospel tells us God hopes for us, what God wants for us. That if we serve only our own narrow self-interests, that we can't really achieve the kind of community that God envisions for us. That the abundant life calls on all of us to work together so that all of us might be lifted up. That if just we come together in a small group and help ourselves, but we ignore the people outside of us, we are forgetting the things that Jesus asks of us. And if we single out one group to be better than another, then we are forgetting what Jesus asks for us. And there are lots of people today out there in the world who claim to love Jesus. And frankly, that's not really that hard. Jesus is pretty lovable. I mean, isn't he? Right? If you think about Jesus and the stories, I would love that guy. Like, if he was like our neighbor, that would be awesome. I don't know if any of you have watched the TV show The Chosen, which I think is really, really awesome. But, the guy who plays Jesus, totally lovable. That guy. I mean, Jesus is a lovable person. It is not hard to love Jesus. But Jesus doesn't ask us to love him. Jesus says we have to love our neighbor. And so the challenge of Christianity isn't learning to love Jesus. It's learning to love Judas, the one who betrayed Jesus. Because that's what Jesus asks of us. And I think it's, oh golly, what was her name? The Catholic worker founder woman. Anyway, she said, I really only love Jesus as much as I love the person I like the least. And I think there's something really truthful in that, is that our Christian love is measured in our ability to seek the welfare and the goodness of people we don't really care for all that much. People we don't really want to spend time on. But like in Benedict's rule, what we're called to do, I think, is to learn how to bloom where we're planted. We find ourselves in this place at this time with these people. Some of those are great people, and some of them are not so great people. But instead of trying to separate ourselves, instead of trying to run away, what Jesus asks of us, what Benedict encouraged his communities to do, what our faith tradition has always tried to practice, is to gather together, to work together, to make this place that is our home, where we've been called to be in this season, the best place that it can be. The place where all of us can grow and bloom, where everybody can live into their potential, where our children have a future and opportunities. That's our call as Christian people. And that we are called to live a life in such a way that we show forth those values in all of the things we do and in all of the things we say. It's not enough that we come here and gather on Sunday morning and praise our God, who is worthy of praise, and that's important. But as important is that we go out in the other 167 hours that are left in the week, besides this one here on Sunday, and to live out that gospel. To love not only Jesus, but also Judas. To learn how we might be loving towards the people we like the least.